Right, get the coughing out the way. Welcome everyone to episode 20 of Studio 8.1. This is where myself, Jarvis Todd, publisher of Telemedia News, Telemedia Magazine, Telemedia Online, and the editor, the wordsmith, the brains behind it all, Paul Skeldon, up there or over there, depending on how you're looking at it. We will be running through a couple of the key stories from the last 2 weeks and doing a little bit of a deep dive into that and looking at it from the perspective of the telemedia industry. And that is, of course, anything to do with driving MVAS, premium content, in-app billing, using all the clever mobile media and marketing channels, messaging, and all the wonderful infrastructure that the telcos have given us to allow us to network and build the world and deliver content. So without further ado, hello, Paul.
Hello, mate. How are you?
As you well know, I am with the COVID, but more importantly, poor you as well for your little tooth. So
yeah, I've lost my tooth in a terrible knife fight. You should see the other fella.
Anyone watching this for the first time might be really badly put off, but
yes, usually you're not coughing and I have teeth. It's
over the next few months we will you'll be able to watch us improve. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about in this particular edition. We're only going to feature two main stories that you published, but they link into a number of interrelated areas, which I think is pretty typical of the industry, actually. The first one is a story about consumer trust. So as we develop new tech and we develop better services and services which I think will hopefully attract, or certainly merchants and service providers think will attract higher value, and consumers are going to love them. The question is really, is this something that's working for consumers, or is it actually creating greater uncertainty for them and in fact a bit of mistrust in many cases? And this is from a report from our dear friends at MEF, who were very kindly hosting a fantastic event in Amsterdam last week, which could well be the source of my illness, but nevertheless a great source of inspiration. And what we're going to talk about after that is how that links into a number of other stories that we've covered over the last couple of weeks. The second story is, unusually, the UK has got some exciting developments. Perhaps not exciting, but it's a great story about how DCB is working in the parking sector, or the MAS business, if you want to talk about mobility as a service, which I know is something that an acronym that we've now had to adopt. And this is about parking and how DCB is working for it, also with parking fines. Although it's a UK case study, I think obviously we're going to see similar versions of this right the way across the globe, certainly Europe, and we'll talk about that in the second half. So let's get cracking, Paul. First story: new tech developments are not achieving their goals of increasing trust in mobile, warns the MEF. And this is from their 8th annual Global Trust Report. And it finds that newer tech developments in mobile, like artificial intelligence, something we talk about a lot in the have talked about a lot in the last few weeks, is actually creating greater uncertainty and increasing mistrust amongst users. So let's talk about the things that came from that report specifically, and then we can sort of rope in some of the other stories that we've covered over the last weeks, which you feel relate quite strongly to this.
Well, yes, I think it's an interesting report from MEF, who put out a lot of interesting reports. Why I picked out this is because it does actually sort of bring together a whole load of other things that we've covered and talked about in the past few weeks, perhaps lending some of them, as we shall come to, a bit more possible importance than at first appeared when we first ran the stories. But the gist of it is, as you say, as more technology has been thrown at consumers, they've actually become less trusting of the technology itself and the services they use on it. One of the big bugbears is artificial intelligence. People don't sort of trust necessarily its intentions. I think some of it as well, it wrapped up in trust, is this idea that AI is like predicting what they're going to like and not like, and throwing up all sorts of recommendations. I mean, anyone who watches sort of Netflix or uses Apple Music or any of those sorts of things, we're constantly being sort of told what we probably want to listen to or watch by AI. It's very prevalent. I think that's sort of starting to make people feel a bit edgy. At best, according to the report, 40% of consumers I think that it's not doing anything. It's not beneficial or non-beneficial. But about 20% only, think it's not great, and are worried about it. But more alarmingly is the idea of sort of trust in how companies are having gathering data, using data, keeping the data safe, and all that kind of thing, which is something we've increasingly had to cover at Telemedia. And as you know, a lot of our friends at companies like MCP and Avena are there to sort of really try and make the services safer to use. There's a whole other sort of side of the industry that protects data and works on cybersecurity, as we talked about in our last podcast. But it seems that this sort of fear of how data is collected, how it's used, and how it's stored is really starting to worry consumers. They don't feel that people have their best intentions at heart, don't necessarily maybe take it as seriously in terms of protecting data that they've given, and also not using it sort of as effectively or politely perhaps as they could, which ties up with the AI side of things as to how they use AI to use that data to predict what they might like. It's all just getting a bit too much and in their face. What the solution is, I don't know. And MEF doesn't throw up, interestingly, any sort of real hard and fast solutions to this problem. But it is an interesting idea put out there that the more technological we're becoming, the less trustful consumers are of all those services, which would have quite wide-ranging and far-reaching impact. I think if you take it to its logical conclusion, that the more sophisticated this all gets, the less people might use it. But what particularly struck me about this story, and why I think it pulls in some other things that we've talked about, is that some of the key lessons from this, according to the MEF, are things like educating consumers and indeed the industry as to sort of how to use the technology responsibly, and how, from a consumer point of view, how it is being sort of used and how it works and what it actually gives to them, and helping to build trust in things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality and stuff like that. But the thing that stood out for me was the statement, "Regulation matters." In a world where many users take action but still feel exposed, regulation plays a critical role in championing user rights.
So easy to say that, isn't it, with that?
Very hard to say, particularly without some of your teeth, I have to say. At least it's not in the Netherlands, which is possibly the most difficult word for me to say currently before I get my dentures. But yes, regulation matters. Now, this immediately leapt out at me when I read it and thought, this is an interesting statement, particularly in light of the Phone Paid Services Authority, the PSA here in the UK, announcing a couple of weeks ago, back at the end of May, that come 2023, it's going to be folded into Ofcom. And I thought that's interesting. Now, the industry has broadly welcomed this move, has sort of said about how it kind of vindicates the approach of using sort of kind of self-policing regulation within the industry and all that kind of thing. But what troubles me is that this can go one of two ways. Either it's now considered not that important, it doesn't need its own regulatory authority, and so is it all going to kind of start to unravel and return to its Wild West roots, particularly at a time when consumers don't trust what's going on, and the industry itself, through the MEF, for example, say regulation matters? Or are we looking at Ofcom is going to actually regulate this industry far more severely and harshly than the PSA did? I don't know what the answer is. I just think these two things are kind of happening at the same time. One, we're changing how we regulate premium rate stuff in the UK at a time when consumer trust is very low, and part of the industry is recommending that the thing that we need most is regulation. Yeah. So I think these two things are really important and have added import to this idea of what's happening to the PSA. And I'd like to hear more from the industry itself about what it thinks of this.
There are a lot of contradictions in this argument, though, as well. Just the other thing that struck me is that, you know, there was emphasis on, okay, so consumers don't necessarily trust it, or the merchants that are delivering these services, because they're constantly sucking up lots and lots of data. And yet, of course, they need that data for the fantastic personalized experience, which everyone says, you know, is going to add value to the user's experience. The second thing is, if the user is obviously worried about their personal data, fair enough. And yet we see that, you know, social media is becoming, you know, the probably most powerful media channel now on the planet. And all the users of social media are giving most of their data away on their social media platforms with impunity, you know, without really considering it. So it's kind of, it's an odd, there's just, to me, it felt like a lot of contradictions. And I think if you're a merchant stuck in the middle, it is really, really difficult. The other aspect of that, which I know you picked up on, was that there were 3 stories that came out recently from the wonderful Avena. Other cybersecurity companies are available, but you picked out 3 talking about their success with intercepting mobile fraud. And also a recent one which says that they're going to be putting out a country report which actually identifies on a monthly basis the most harmful malicious apps in the App Store, which seemed to me like a really brilliant idea. Although, you know, I wonder how much responsibility a user will actually ever take. I think to me, the emphasis has got to be on the B2C, the B bit. So the merchants, the brands, the service providers that sit within the telemedia ecosystem, because, you know, try as you might to talk about how consumers have got some responsibility, and for sure they do, but I know that I don't change my passwords as often as I should, and I'm relatively educated in the area. So I doubt very much whether the man on the street is going to can be trusted to protect himself, and will still be exposing himself to you know, successful frauds. And I think one of the most kind of revealing and obvious sort of sentiments which has come from the anti-fraud community was, and I'm quoting from one of the Avena pieces, cybersecurity is an area of opportunity that often lies disguised within many merchants as simply an operational consideration. And I think that was the case 5 years ago. And they go on, by managing security threats the right way and with the right partners, cybersecurity can be turned into a significant source of competitive advantage. So to me, that says, and I think we're seeing it now, where companies and service providers and merchants and brands and networks are using the fact that they're taking cybersecurity seriously to specifically tackle that issue of trust, not only just with their partners, but obviously that should therefore filter through to the consumer. But which again, I think probably then it puts the consumer back in the situation where they go, well, actually, I don't really need to look after my passwords, or, you know, don't need to worry about it because these guys are doing it for me. And of course, you know, they can to a certain extent, but as we see with banks and with some of the biggest companies in the world, nobody is completely secure. So it's a dilemma, I think, for everybody in the digital space going forward. And I don't think it's something that's going to be disappearing from the telemedia agenda anytime soon.
No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head that in the B2C model, it's the B that has to take responsibility for it. And a lot of companies are, and there are a lot of companies, you know, as you mentioned, Avena, others are available who help them do this. But I think it's, again, an interesting time for a business side regulator that's run by the industry itself to disappear.
Yeah, I think you made a point as well, or there was a point in that piece about the PSA and the change or being absorbed by Ofcom, that there might be similar moves across Europe, or there's going to be it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the success of that setup has an effect on regulation or the regulatory environment right the way across Europe. So that's something that, again, people will certainly be able to get an update on in World Telemedia in Marbella on the 19th to 21st of October. In fact, I would anticipate that the Impello country updates would be just the right place to go to to find out about the.
Absolutely. I think that's the vital thing is this sort of getting a sort of accurate and very regular update of what's happening in each country. So what the threats are and how to mitigate them, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And I think it's an ongoing and very dynamic thing. So, I mean, in many ways, that's a good thing. It is the industry sort of not regulating itself, but protecting itself and protecting its consumers, which seems to have been, we've had Impello doing country updates at the show, haven't we, for a number of years.
Yeah.
So I think the initiative is already there. I think it's just going to become ever more important. And like you say, it adds a competitive advantage to the merchants and aggregators and service providers who do embrace this, because they will be the ones that do gain the consumer trust of those people who are distrustful, as outlined in the MEF study.
Yeah, well, let's stay with the consumer and move on to what I think is a great news story. I mean, apart from the fact that it's lovely to talk about a DCB success in the United Kingdom for a change, it's also nice to talk about a story which, to me, is a telemedia application, a mobile payments application, which is genuinely for the good of the consumer. And referring to that last case where companies might be saying, well, we're sort of providing this technology for the consumer benefit, but actually it's not for the consumer's benefit at all. It's for to cut costs at the back end, for example. But this is definitely for consumers' benefits. And the story is new instant payment option for parking and penalty charge notices goes live in the UK. Now, initially, you might think, well, mobile payments for parking, not that new. We know it's the transportation or the MaaS market, mobile as a service market, is big and growing. But, why is this an interesting story, you might ask? Well, the story reads, Conduit Transportation, which is our dear old friend Chris Newell, has partnered with Debit My Mobile, which is our good friend Gary Corbett and Dynamic Mobile Billing, to provide payment services rolled out using direct carrier billing to help motorists and genuinely help motorists in the UK pay for parking sessions and any parking fines instantly without the need for anything other than SMS. Now, I'll just, before you crack on, Paul, for anyone that is watching from outside the United Kingdom, I don't know how it works on the other side of the water, but over here, one of my main bugbears, apart from acronyms for that are not necessary, it's been the ridiculous scenario where we haven't been able to use simple SMS payments for something like parking. When I think we only have to go back to about 1995, and I think you could buy a Coca-Cola using SMS, but you had to, in the UK, but generally have some kind of account with some kind of app, like Ringo or Go Park Me or Park It Up wherever, which invariably, you only ever used once every 2 years. You certainly could never remember your password. You probably didn't have connectivity. You couldn't log in, you couldn't park, and you ended up abandoning the whole process and just taking your chances and probably then getting a parking ticket. So I didn't realize that some time ago, the situation with parking was released from the European Payment Directive, wasn't it? Which allows people to now be able to basically pay for their parking using SMS or scanning a short code. Got to be good news. And I think this illustrates exactly the benefits, the seamless, instant, wonderful consumer benefits of a classic telemedia payment service for something as simple as, parking, ticketing, and interestingly on this one, paying the penalty.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think we've all done it. Anyone in the UK who's tried to park their car anywhere, it's very difficult. Increasingly, the machines do have a contactless thing, so you can pay with your card or the contactless part of your phone, but it doesn't always work. I don't know about you, but I very rarely these days have any kind of cash on me at all. And parking's just becoming a bit of a nightmare because they all have different services. You can't remember the login. They don't remember you. You probably changed your car since the last time you used it because you do it so infrequently. It's all a mess. This, I guess, is another service to add to that. But I think what's great about it is that it is the way it works using carrier billing. It is just much slicker and quicker and easier. And I do like the idea that you can also pay your parking fine by scanning a QR code that comes on your parking ticket, and paying that by carrier billing as well, which has to be a first.
But although you've paid your parking, you shouldn't really be getting a parking fine, right?
Exactly. If this works, you don't get the parking fine. But I like to think that our friends at Conduent and at Debit My Mobile have decided that, well, if this doesn't work, or it for some reason doesn't work for people, at least they can use it to pay their fine that they'll get. I guess it's hopeful that they will be helping people pay fines for other parking services that didn't work, thus making life easier for the consumer, but also helping car park owners to think, do you know what, we really should talk to Conduent Transport because their pay for parking stuff is way better.
Now, interestingly, I thought that the point that Gary Corbett makes at the end, where he says we're delighted to be working with Conduent, who we see as an ideal partner given their position in providing payment and transportation infrastructure and services to both central and local government clients. Now, what I think that means is that the market is much, much bigger than just parking. So a company like Conduent, who are obviously working in areas like local government, there will be a number of other applications across public services networks whereby this type of payment mechanism can be deployed. So I would imagine that you're going to start seeing the same with bikes, as we've seen with Democo in Germany, train tickets, your bus tickets, parking tickets, so any kind of infrastructure project. If you've got a partner like Conduent who have specialized in that, you've got one company, that specializes in dealing with that area. Once they get this and see this one working, I think that the applications across towns and cities will be rolled out, and I see a friction-free future for us.
Absolutely. I think as well with these things, what's great about them is that they make sort of carrier billing a kind of mainstream payment idea that people don't really think about. This just that's an easy way to pay, and so you can then start to roll it out for all sorts of other things. I think if you continue with the local government idea, you could probably pay for things like your sort of green waste bin license and things, because you're not paying for a physical thing, you're paying for a ticket essentially. So there's all sorts of things. I mean, every spring I realize I've forgotten to renew my green waste bin license. If I could just scan it and pay it while standing there, it would be so much easier.
But again, I mean, this goes back to one of the issues that we've talked about for many years with regards to why DCB hasn't been, more successful and what's holding it back. And obviously, trust and education are two of the reasons why, you could certainly argue that it hasn't been as successful as it should have been, which obviously relates back into the last story. Was, consumers have to trust it. It's got to be easy, and they've got to, if you've got, for example, government, in this case, or government bodies use it, saying use this, or as we've seen with with charity donations, the more of that kind of application, the more people go, oh yeah, okay, I get that. And as we've said many times before, MNOs have got could be playing a much bigger part in getting consumers to be feeling much more comfortable and confident about using mobile payment solutions. So yeah, trust, I think, is everything, and getting the big guys to promote it is going to be nothing but good news for our industry.
If I may just say that the other genius thing about applying it to car parking is usually you're in such a hurry to do it and don't want to faff about because you're invariably parked your car because you're about to do something else. As people will just use DCB anyway because it's there, and that gets past the trust issue or wondering what it is. You just do it, realize that it did work and was fine, and then away you go, happily using DCB for all sorts of other things because it worked and it all came up on your trusted phone bill and all the rest of it. So I think it's actually quite a clever, like charity was this is a clever way of mass market acceptance for DCB.
Agreed. Okay, well, listen, we don't want to bore the pants off everybody, because we want them to come back again in 2 weeks' time, when we'll do another live session and review 2 or 3 of the hot stories. I am going to go back to organising World Telemedia 2022, as I mentioned earlier, 19th to the 21st of October at the Grand Melia Hotel in wonderful sunny Marbella. A beautiful thing about that is, of course, everyone will be back from their holidays. There will be no airport chaos, and you can travel there in absolute with no fear of any disruption.
And you can travel with no fear of getting COVID, because you've had it.
Because I've had it. So, Paul, you've got another 2 weeks of sifting through the telemedia jungle for some.
Well, indeed, I shall read everything there is to read while I'm waiting in the dentist's waiting room to have my teeth reconstructed.
Okay.
And hopefully I'll probably still be gappy in 2 weeks' time, but I'll know an awful lot more about what's going on.
Good. And I will see you again, same time, same place, on the Tuesday, the 5th of July, for episode 21. It's our 21st birthday.
It is. It is indeed. It is indeed. A more milestone it is.
It is. So until then, cheerio, mate.
Take care, mate. Get well soon. I hope you feel better. And see you, everybody who's watching.